A nation divided, thousands of families torn apart, years of violence, and then a camera begins to roll. A football team has just qualified for the FIFA World Cup. Players are celebrating, journalists are shouting questions. The entire country is watching. Then something completely unexpected happens. The team's captain walks toward the television cameras. He takes the microphone, his teammates slowly gather around him. And instead of celebrating, he drops to his knees. His voice begins to shake. This isn't a victory speech. It's a plea, a desperate request directed at millions of people, not football fans, his own country. Within hours, that speech will be heard across the world. Within days, something almost impossible will begin to happen. But how does a footballer reach the point where an entire nation is willing to listen? To answer that question, we have to go back, long before the trophies, long before Chelsea, long before the world knew his name. Because this story was never really about football. It was about responsibility. Stay with us until the end. Because what happened after that speech remains one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of sport. Didier Drogba entered the world in Abidjan, Ivory Coast in 1978. His country was beautiful, full of life, full of hope. But like many children growing up there, stability was never guaranteed. When Didier was still very young, his parents made one of the hardest decisions any family can make. They sent him to France to live with his uncle. It wasn't because they wanted to be apart. It was because they hoped distance would create opportunity. Imagine being just a child, a new country, a different language, different customs, different schools, far away from the people who loved you most. For many children, that kind of separation creates loneliness. For Didier, it created resilience. Football became more than a game. It became a language, a place where he belonged without having to explain himself. Yet nothing came easily. He wasn't considered a prodigy. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the strongest. Injuries slowed him down. Opportunities disappeared. Many coaches overlooked him. At times, even Didier questioned whether football would ever become more than a dream. But there was one lesson he never forgot. Life wasn't measured by how quickly you succeeded. It was measured by how often you refused to quit. That lesson would shape everything that came next, because one day, the world would know his name, not for the reason anyone expected. Unlike many football legends, Didier Drogba wasn't a teenage superstar. His rise came late, very late. While other future stars were already playing for Europe's biggest clubs, Didier was still fighting for opportunities in lower divisions. He moved from team to team, learning, growing, waiting. There were no headlines, no magazine covers, no crowds chanting his name, just hard work, quiet determination, and a dream that refused to disappear. Every setback made him stronger. Every rejection forced him to improve. Years later, people would describe him as unstoppable, but very few saw the years when nothing seemed to move at all. Eventually, everything changed. His performances began attracting attention, first in France, then across Europe. Suddenly, the clubs that once ignored him wanted to sign him. Then came Chelsea, one of the biggest clubs in the world. The pressure was enormous, the expectations even greater. But Didier had already learned something priceless. Pressure doesn't create character, it reveals it. Goals followed, victories followed, finals followed. Fans adored him. He became one of the greatest strikers of his generation. To millions of people, this looked like the happy ending, but while stadiums celebrated, his thoughts often traveled thousands of miles away, back home, to Ivory Coast. Because while his career was reaching incredible heights, his country was falling apart. While Didier Drogba was lifting trophies in England, his homeland was slowly falling apart. Ivory Coast had become divided, not just politically, not just geographically. Families were being separated. Communities no longer trusted one another. Fear spread from village to village. Hope became harder to find. For millions of people, every new day brought another reason to worry. Children were growing up surrounded by uncertainty. Parents wondered if peace would ever return. The headlines spoke about conflict, but behind every headline, there were ordinary people trying to survive. Didier watched all of this from thousands of miles away. Every time he returned home, he saw the difference. The streets felt different, the smiles were fewer, the tension was impossible to ignore. He was celebrated everywhere he went, but he couldn't celebrate with his country, because success means very little when the people you love are suffering. Most athletes learn to separate sport from politics, to focus only on the next match, the next trophy, the next contract. But Didier found himself asking a different question. What is the value of my success if it cannot help my people? That question stayed with him. Every training session, every flight, every goal, every victory, it became impossible to ignore. Then came one match that would change everything. Ivory Coast had one chance, one final opportunity to qualify for the FIFA World Cup. The entire nation stopped to watch. For 90 minutes. The country forgot the conflict. North and South, young and old, rich and poor, everyone wanted the same thing. One victory. Nobody realized that something even bigger than football was about to happen. The final whistle blew. Ivory Coast had done it. For the first time in history, the nation had qualified for the FIFA World Cup. Players embraced. Some laughed. Others cried. Journalists rushed toward the dressing room, expecting celebrations. Instead, history walked into the room. Television cameras surrounded Didier Drogba. His teammates gathered quietly behind him. No one had prepared a speech. No public relations team had written a script. These words came from the heart. Didier looked directly into the camera. Then, he did something no one expected. He dropped to his knees, one by one. His teammates followed. The room fell silent. Then Didier spoke. He pleaded with the people of Ivory Coast, not as a footballer, not as a celebrity, as a son, as a brother, as one of them. He asked for forgiveness, for unity, for peace. He reminded the nation that they had just celebrated together, that for 90 minutes, they had been one people again. If football could unite them for a match, why couldn't they choose peace for their children? Those images traveled across the world. Millions watched. But the people who mattered most were watching from home. Something extraordinary happened. People listened, not because Didier was famous, because they knew he was sincere. He wasn't speaking to protect his image. He was risking it. He chose to use the greatest moment of his career to ask an entire nation to stop fighting. Very few athletes ever sacrifice a victory speech. Didier sacrificed his for something infinitely greater. And slowly, something began to change. Peace doesn't happen because of one speech. History is always more complex than that. But sometimes, one voice becomes the spark that reminds people what is still possible. In the months that followed, efforts toward reconciliation gained momentum. Leaders met. Communities began talking again. Hope, something that had almost disappeared, slowly returned. Years later, even those who study the conflict would point to that extraordinary moment as one of the symbols that helped encourage dialogue and unity. Didier never claimed he had ended a war. He never wanted the credit, because he understood something deeply important. Real leadership isn't about being the hero. It's about helping others believe that peace is still worth pursuing. That humility made people respect him even more. Then he made another remarkable decision. He asked that an important World Cup qualifying match be played in Bouaké, a city that had once been at the center of the conflict. Many believed it was too risky, too symbolic, too emotional, but the match went ahead, and tens of thousands of Ivorians filled the stadium, not as enemies, as supporters. For one unforgettable afternoon, football became a language stronger than division. The stadium echoed with something the country had almost forgotten: unity. For Didier, that victory meant more than any trophy he would ever lift, because medals celebrate careers, peace changes lives. For many people, that speech would have been enough. It would have become the defining moment of an extraordinary career. A story told for generations, but Didier Drogba saw things differently. He believed words only matter when they are followed by action. As the years passed, football continued to give him everything most athletes dream of: championships, international recognition, financial success, a place among the greatest players of his generation. Yet every time he returned to Ivory Coast, he noticed the same reality. Children still struggled to access health care. Families still faced challenges that no trophy could solve. Entire communities still needed hope in a much more practical form. So Didier asked himself another question. If football gave me this platform, what am I going to do with it? His answer became the Didier Drogba Foundation. Not because he wanted another title, not because he wanted headlines, because he wanted to solve real problems. The foundation began supporting healthcare projects, hospitals, medical equipment, education, opportunities for children who had been born into circumstances they never chose. One of its most meaningful achievements was helping fund a modern hospital in Abidjan, giving thousands of families access to better medical care. To Didier, that building represented something much bigger than bricks and concrete. It represented dignity, because every child deserves treatment, every mother deserves hope. Every family deserves the chance to look toward tomorrow. Many famous people donate money. Didier wanted something more. He wanted to create lasting change. Even today, long after many of his greatest goals have faded into football history, his work continues, quietly, without demanding attention, without needing applause, because the mission was never about becoming famous. It was about becoming useful. So, let's return to the question that began this story. Can one man stop a war? If we're being completely honest, wars are complicated. They involve history, politics, fear, generations of pain. No single speech can erase all of that. But perhaps, that was never the right question. Maybe the better question is this: can one person remind millions that peace is still possible? That answer is yes. Because sometimes history doesn't change through power. Sometimes it changes because one voice speaks when everyone else remains silent. Didier Drogba didn't negotiate peace agreements. He didn't command armies. He didn't hold political office. He simply used the only thing he had: his voice, his credibility, his love for his country. And for one extraordinary moment, an entire nation stopped, listened, and remembered something it had almost forgotten: that they belonged to one another. That may be the greatest victory of Didier Drogba's life. Not the Premier League, not the Champions League, not the Golden Boots, but the moment football became a bridge instead of a battlefield. That is a legacy no trophy can ever match. Millions of people will always remember Didier Drogba as one of football's greatest strikers. The powerful goals, the unforgettable finals, the nights that made history. But beyond the stadium lights, there was another victory, one that never appeared on the scoreboard, one that cannot be measured by medals. It was the victory of choosing unity over division, service over fame, responsibility over comfort. Perhaps that is why Didier Drogba's story continues to inspire people far beyond football. Because greatness isn't always defined by what you achieve for yourself. Sometimes, it's defined by what you are willing to do for everyone else. Maybe that's the hidden truth behind every remarkable life we've explored on this channel. The people we admire most aren't remembered only because they were talented. They're remembered because when life gave them influence, they chose to use it to lift others. Didier Drogba did exactly that. And perhaps that's why millions will always remember his goals. But history will remember his courage. If this story changed the way you see Didier Drogba, we'd love to hear from you. Do you think sport can truly change the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden side of extraordinary people, subscribe to See Beyond the Spotlight. Every week, we tell stories that go far beyond fame, beyond success, and beyond the spotlight.